Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis. Well, I would say volume 3, which is the conclusion of Ayin Beis. We're learning the foundational texts, the sources of this Ayin Beis to be able to understand the full picture. So we began learning Torah Ohr, the Maimer Chanukah that was said, Tovkuf Samach Zayin. I said that corresponds with 1805, when the Alter Rebbe said that Maimer. We began learning on page 38b, and we're up to 38c. So let's sum up what we're learning in the Torah Ohr, which has been cited and elaborated upon in Ayin Beis, and particularly I'm referring to pages 1350 through 1352, and even more specifically 1466. And that is the idea of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Again, as far as the general context goes, remember, it's the soul, the human soul, the divine soul that comes into this world that serves as the primary agent and ambassador of God's to transform this world and fulfill his purpose, in the language of Ayin Beis, to create the interface between the divine and existence, to saturate all of existence with awareness and consciousness of Elokus, of transcendence. And that's a hard and difficult and arduous process. That's what's called Avodas Hashem, Avodah, from the beginning of time, from the first human beings, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, placed in the Garden of Eden, going through the entire history till this very day. That is our work, the Neshama's work. But the Neshama does not come unprepared. It does not come without tools and weapons, spiritual weapons, and all the resources it needs to fulfill this. So the Neshama itself is compared to a flame. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Flame of God. Why like a flame? So the Alter Rebbe explains, and Ayin Beis elaborates, a flame divides into 3 parts. There's the wick, its primary part. There's the shemen, the fuel that fuels it. And there's the oil, the product that it produces is the actual fire and flame. In Avodas Hashem, he said that we have to begin by understanding the concept of V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, that all of us, both parts of the person, and we'll soon get back how that fits into the flame, both the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, should both serve and love God. How do you get to a place like that when the Yetzer Hara, like he said, on its own, wouldn't listen to a person, wouldn't listen to the divine soul? Haloi yishma, love. So he explains, first dissecting the anatomy, that both the divine soul and the animal soul are made. There are 2 nefashos within us, 2 souls, are both consist of intellect and emotions. The intellect of the divine soul is solely preoccupied with divine matters, godliness, nothing else. It in turn gives birth to mides, love and reverence, ava v'yira, directed to the same place, because that's its whole soul exclusive activity is the transcendent, the divine. The animal soul, on the other hand, zelu umazeh, also has seichel, but its seichel is involved in begashmis, melubish binyonim gashmim, which is the diametric opposite of the seichel of the nefesh elokis, which is involved in a wisdom that's beyond itself. Chakim v'lei b'chochmi yediyah. The chachma of the nefesh habamis, the seichel of the nefesh habamis, is involved in its own preservation and its own pleasures, its own needs. And therefore the midas that come from the animal soul also are midas that come from Seichel HaGashmi. So the midas of the divine soul are called the Yetzer Tov. The midas of the Nefesh Habamis are called the Yetzer Hara. And then, now comes the work with Tzarech HaAdam. The person is charged with, and this is his responsibility, Leikafilon, to refrain, to restrain, to curb, to tame, all the words you can use, the animal desires of the selfish impulses of and interests of the divine, of the animal soul. It should not follow the midas that are born from Seichel Gashmi, rak v'ahavta sashavai lekecha. That's the mitzvah of ahavta. That also the Yetzer Hara should be directed to find love in godliness. And how's that done? If we said the Yetzer Tov on its own is the Yetzer Hara on its own is not that way, she says, "B'hagbir keich nefesh alikiyas hamaskelis." This is the overpowering element that the divine soul's seichel of the nefesh alikiyas convinces and is able to persuade the animal soul to go along. Like exactly as he says in Tanya, in chapter 9, there's a perpetual battle between Yaakov and Esau, between Nefesh L'Kis, Nefesh Habamis. They both want to control the Ir Ktana, Zahaguf, the small city, which is the body and its citizens, the human being, basically the thought, speech, and action of a person, and they battle over that. And as the Nefesh L'Kis, the goal is Nefesh L'Kis should be the one with its mind and its intellectual superiority and focus on the divine, in turn will convince, persuade, educate, and train the divine soul to also follow that and bring to the haft. So how do we get to that? So the next piece, the Alter Rebbe continued, and again, this is all paralleled and all described in Ayin Beis as well. Based on this is Shema. Before V'ahavta, we have to go back to the Pasuk Rish. Doesn't begin V'ahavta as Hashem Elakacha. First, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Baruch Shem Kved Malchusei Le'elam V'ad. So now, the Alter Rebbe explains what is the content of Shema. Shema comes from the word Lashon Havana, to understand. It's a form of contemplation. That when a person conceives, a maskil, umizbeinenas, in Hashem Elokeinu, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. Elokeinu is Mamala Kalalman, the divine energy that permeates and vivifies existence. Havaya is Sevav Kalalman, is the divine that beyond existence. So, which is the one that creates, like he says, Ayin v'yisavis hayesh huma Ayin mamish. And the yesh of existence is created from this Ayin. And it's a creation that's perpetual. Nimshach tamid, meaning it's not a one-time thing that happened. Every second, right now, the yesh of this world, including the nefesh habamis, everything about this world, which is Elam Hazeh, and everything creation is created by godliness, and that therefore turns into from Havaya Lekenu. Doesn't spell it out exactly, but Havaya Lekenu, basically the divine within existence, is one with Havaya that's beyond, and that leads to Havaya Echad, the end of Shema. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That what? That the Eibishter is Echad, the same God that is immutable, unchangeable. That's the Echad here. Not just that he's one God and not many, and not just one reality, but also that it's a oneness, a seamless oneness before creation, after creation. Creation doesn't change anything. Atu mishenivra elam, atu kedu shenivra, atu hu mishenivra. This Savas does not create a shinui, because it's unlike human actions. When we invest and create something, it does have impact on us, on our minds, and we have to invest in it. Yeah, a person when a person creates something, he has to focus on, has to direct himself, so he's involved, engaged, and it has an effect on him. It affects his keich sichle. Question is why he only says keich sichle. It also affects his very energy. If you're building something, you have to invest strength in it, and you don't have strength to do something else. But keich sichle, because less likely, because he's talking here about that's driven by your seichel, and your seichel therefore is invested. Creation is also driven by God's seichel. However, God's seichel is not invested, like he says, remains above it, because by Savas Helmas Mensav Ein Poelem by Shinei Chaz v'Shalom v'Hashem Echad K'may Kedem Shenivra Elam. And why is that the case? So comes the next verse, the next statement. Baruch Shem Kved Malchusei Le'elam V'ad, because the entire creation comes from Shem Kved Malchusei, which is only a shame, only a reflection. In Elam Chins Malchusei shemashu melech aleim, which is only a ha'ara. And there, in that ha'ara, you could say koyach hapoel benifel, that godliness is invested because b'dvar Hashem, with the words of God, He creates existence. But it's all coming from Malchus. So therefore, that's all the contemplation of Shema and Baruch Shem. Bottom line is that the Nefesh Elikis is contemplating on the superiority, on the uniqueness, the exclusivity of God's reality. And that in turn is now going to talk about how that affects the Nefesh Habams. The Vahaftas Hashem L'kecha b'chol avavcha. And that's where we stopped, and we'll continue learning now its effect. Now that we know the few points he made. Number one, the Shema that Havai Hu Elokeinu, and that Hashem Echad, and the Baruch Shem, that it's all a reflection, only Malchus. And as I explained, the Mitler Rebbe's Maimer and the Ayin Beis, the 11 pages we learned from page 1466 to 1477, the end was all about this Yichud. So now he goes back, and this is where the Rebbe Rashab does not continue. This next section is most likely what the Rebbe Rashab would have done had he continued writing, because the Rebbe Rashab stopped in understanding the Yichud with an elaboration, much more than what we just learned. But in the Ramai, we'll see. So now that we know there's this Yichud, what does that do? How does that change the equation? And it is an Aveda, because without the Shema and Baruch Shem, the Yetzer Hara and the Nefesh Habamis would not be affected. So now he's going to explain how it's affected. And again, the Mitler Rebbe's Maimer is going to elaborate a lot more, and that becomes the bridge to Ayin Beis. We'll learn that next. That'll be not right. Next does not mean today or tomorrow. We still have a few pages to go here in the Maimer and the explanation of this Maimer in Torah Ohr. So now let's continue learning inside, but this is the context. And now he's going to explain its effect. And then, okay, so let's read the line. I'm on the third, the column C. It would be considered Lamed Ches Gimel, which is 38C. So it's the first column, the top page. It says 76. We usually don't refer to the numbers. We usually refer to the Hebrew. So whenever you see citations of Torah, you'll see Lamed Ches Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. These are the four columns, because the Torah Ohr is structured. I should have said Torah Ohr is structured in columns as opposed to just pages. So every page has two columns. So this is the second side of the page, column 3, similar like in Gemara, Amud Aleph, Amud Beis. In Ayin Beis, there's no Amud Aleph, Amud Beis. Every page is numbered, just for technical, just for if you're the technical part of it. So I'm going to continue reading. It's basically 3, 6, 9 lines from the top of the page. If you want to follow along, these pages are PDFs of these pages are on our site, ayinbeis.com. Just like we had PDF pages scanned of Ayin Beis, we also have Torah Ohr. You'll see it says there Torah Ohr, and then there's the Mitler Rebbe's Maimer, also all scanned there. So you can follow along if you want to follow the text. It's right up there on ayinbeis.com. Okay. It's also posted on our group, but it's easier probably to read it on the website. Then okay. So now that we've talked about what the contemplation of Shema and Baruch Shem is, he says, when a person immerses himself, yaimik from the word oimik, he immerses himself, like deeply engrosses himself, concentrates his mind and his thought, bezeh, in this that we just said about the nature of the divine and its relationship with existence, the Hashem Elokeinu and the Hashem Echad and the Baruch Shem. And the way he does it, he says, Yamik Adnei repeats again, Ba'emek binose u'bu'umke deliba, with the depth of his understanding. Ba'emek binose, from bina, and furthermore, bu'umke deliba, the depths of his heart. In other words, it's not just an academic, theoretical idea but it's one that also affects the depths of his heart. He doesn't yet mean an actual a stimulation of emotions, but he means, like we talked about, midah shebeseichel, that it's also affecting him. In other words, he's learning it in a way that is personal. So what happens then? So the Alter Rebbe is going to talk about the dynamic. What happens through this contemplation? Ozai, then, when you concentrate in this fashion, then tebatel hanefesh hachiyunis maskalosa begashmis. That will eliminate, and that you could say pushes aside. Tevatel has many meanings. It could be eliminate, it could be nullify, it could be pushed aside. Here you can use all the words that are necessary, and probably many words and many people, it can be in different ways. But bottom line is, what's happening is that when you have used your mind, as the Nefesh Elikis has directed you, to concentrate on godliness, and all the aspects that we just learned, that all of existence is just Malchus, and therefore there's no shinui in God, and everything in existence does have a shinui. Again, the Alter Rebbe is very brief, but in the Mittler Rebbe's mind and the Ayin Beis, it was elaborate. So this entire contemplation, what it does is it affects something. It causes to push aside or to nullify the seichel of the nefesh hachiyunis maskalosa. Nefesh hachiyunis is another name for nefesh habamis. It means the living soul, or it means the animal soul. Chiyunis as in your survival, your existence, not your divine soul. Maskalosa begashmis. Remember, we learned earlier, what is the seichel of nefesh habamis? What is its occupation? With gashmis, with the material world, with the material universe, material pleasures, everything of this world. So this is bonus, is overpowering and eliminating, at least for the time being, the animal soul's involvement, or the in eskalosa begashmis betagbeirus hanefesh alikis. And how is that done? With the overpowering element of the divine soul, hamaskelis umizbeinenes, that's conceiving and contemplating b'gedulas Ein Sof Baruch Hu, in the greatness of Ein Sof, lohelid meruach binosa v'izbanunusa, to give birth from the spirit of his understanding and his banusa and his contemplation, ava aza, a powerful love, kirish be'esh, that burns like a fiery flame, like a flaming fire. L'dafka b'yizbarach, to attach himself, dafka b'y, to God, b'dveika, v'chasheka, v'chafetza. These are languages you see a lot of it also in Tanya. Dveika would mean cleaving. V'chasheka means desire. And chafetza means pleasure. Different words for this. Chafetza could be desire. Chasheka could be more passion. Probably I would do that. Chasheka is more passion. Chafetza desire. Bislavus atzuma. The Alter Rebbe is not sufficing with one expression. He wants to demonstrate that this has really brought the divine soul alive. Bislavus atzum, with an intense fire and passion. At kleis hanefesh, to the point that the nefesh is literally longing, yearning. Kleis is expiring. Kameshikosav nichsefa v'gam kolsa nafshi. My soul yearned, longed, and also expired. Nichsefa v'gam kolsa nafshi. So this is a level of deep emotional, the throes of deep emotional passion toward what? Toward godliness. Because he didn't just contemplate in very superficial ways, that this individual who said Shema and Baruch Shem really came to a very deep emotional reaction in understand when they came to appreciate what God is all about. So, on a very simple level, we may not be able to master that art, but think of it this way. Let's say you're involved in something that's very petty. You're playing some game. Then, whatever reason, someone gets your attention and they start sharing with you that there's a war going on in Israel. And we need you right now to be mobilized, to daven, to learn, to do mitzvahs, or to come to fight the war, physically or spiritually. What do you think is going to happen? So if you're a conscientious person, the little games you're playing with, immediately you're going to reject it. It's nonsense compared to what you just are being called upon. In other words, it's all about what priorities. So think of it conceptually. A person is involved in material existence, whatever it may be, in their investments, in money, in pleasure. We all have a list of things that this material world entices us with. And then you say Shema properly, not lip service. And you contemplate what God is about. Come to realize, 1 second, my little reality here, he called it before sheker. He said it's sheker compared. It's negligible. It's inferior. Not talking about sheker. I can't say it's a delusion, but it completely pales in comparison to this type of reality called godliness. So what happened, and all that we discussed, and Loisha Nisi, and Hashem Elokeinu, and Hashem Echad, and that is the real life force. That's the primary life of existence. And Ayin Bezi added the words, and therefore it's the ikir of the world. What's the main thing of existence? The outer shell, or the soul life force that gives it life? So all of this contemplation, you're realizing where real life resides. So that causes you want to be connected to reality. You want to be connected to the source. You don't want to be connected to some outer tip of the iceberg, just the outer expression of it all. So that creates a tremendous longing and yearning, as he just described it. So what's the effect is going to have on the seichel of the nefesh habamis? It pushes it aside. It has no value at this point. This doesn't mean you've transformed and you don't have a nefesh habamis. But for all practical purposes, right now, this seichel of the nefesh halakis has taken over control over the nefesh habamis. But he says a little more. Let's read further. The imcha lo chafatzti, and nothing but you. I don't desire anything but God. Be'eretz imcha lo chafatzti ba'eretz. Kala se'eri v'levavi. These are all verses that he brings, some from Tehillim, some from other psukim, that my sari means my flesh and my heart are all kala, are all like yearning, longing. It's like someone who's in love. When you're in love with something, what happens? That consumes you. It's all consuming. And anything else you were involved in a moment before gets completely nullified, completely pushed aside. Okay. So this is what the nefesh halakis is now arrived at. This type of passion toward godliness. And what effect will that have now on the animal soul? It still has seichel. It's not like the animal soul disappeared. It's just not getting your attention. You're not focusing on it. It's not consuming you because you have something else you're consumed with, is the divine. So now the Alter Rebbe says that will cause that the nefesh achiyunis will become kishemen, like oil, like fuel. Hanimshech achar apsila, that is drawn and follows the wick, because the wick is now the divine soul is active, and what is it? It takes control over the shemen. Without the wick, the shemen is doing whatever it's doing. It's involved in material life. The chacham of the nefesh habamis, the seichel of the nefesh habamis. But now that the seichel of the nefesh halakis has so consumed the person, so the nefesh habamis is now serving and becoming like oil that feeds and follows and is drawn and after the wick. Shehi ner Hashem nishmas adam. What is that wick? Is the ner Hashem nishmas adam, the soul of God, which is the flame of God, the fire of God, the candle of God, which is the soul of the person. It's all being aligned. So the neshama, the nefesh halakis, is always divine, like we learned. But how about the nefesh habamis? But now, due to nefesh halakis's activity and involvement and concentration and contemplation, it in turn affects that the animal soul, and its seichel will also become part of the Ner Hashem, because it's feeding and fueling the divine soul. Shaneshama hi apsila, the soul, meaning the divine soul, is the wick. Hamechaberes, remember he used the words in the moshel. He said, mechaberes, it attaches, it connects, interfaces, eir ha'ava, aza, v'rishpei eish, the light, the flame of the love, of the strong love, the powerful love, v'rishpei eish, and like the fiery and the passionate fire, and the flaming fire. That it what? That it be mechaberet, it connects it with the Shem and lahoyer, the nefesh habamis. It should radiate in the nefesh habamis. It should affect and radiate, illuminate in the animal soul. Acha tichle v'tichsev gamkein. To the animal soul should also yearn and long. Gamkein ledavka boy b'dveika v'chasheka. B'dveika v'chasheka. Should also long with this cleaving and with this desire, or did I say before, passion. So that's the vahafta, that's what he goes. Uliyes vahafta, and this will bring to the second part of the Shema, after the Shema and Baruch Shem, vahafta b'chol levavcha. I love that b'chol levavcha, with both sides of your heart. So without the Shema and the Baruch Shem, you have a neshama, nefesh alikis, you have a nefesh habamis. But it's the Shema that activates the divine soul, gets its fires burning. Those fires in turn affect the animal soul, that it's, instead of focusing on its own interests, becomes a shemen that feeds and fuels the divine love that the divine soul has initiated, has generated, and it too will yearn and love and long for that. And then he continues. Furthermore, v'godol yiyeh keach kles hanefesh habamis b'yeser seis v'chin shemen hanichle v'ela ad shenasu menu kule eish. And this is not just that the animal soul is schlepped along and follows along, it becomes a great source, it's the fuel. Because remember, the psila, even though it could burn, but we learned earlier that if it's just a psila, it will not burn properly and will be quick and burn out, and not in a balanced way. It's the shemen that fuels the wick that should burn properly. So he says, so now, and great will be this this power of the expiration, or the soul's yearning of the, now the animal soul has gotten involved. The yeser says with additional power. In a state of like the oil that is being consumed, and elevates, until that whole oil is transformed from being just raw fuel to becoming the eish itself. Because remember, the oil, as it continues to burn, slowly begins to be consumed. It doesn't remain oil. It becomes the fuel, becomes fire. To the point it becomes kule eish shel eir haner, from the light of the candle, al yedei b'chinas tzoak libam. What is that naveda? That the nefesh habamis is the cry of the heart. So the nefesh habamis is recognizing this power of godliness and is crying out. That tzoak libam, that psycha, that cry is stronger than the cry of the animals, of the divine soul, because the divine soul never experienced distance or darkness. Now, all this he doesn't say explicitly; he just says it very briefly. But in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer and the Ayin Beis, he says explicitly. That's why it's interesting learning it here. It's all very compact and very concentrated. But if you read every line, you'll start understanding. Tzach Libam, like we learned earlier, that the distance, like the Baal Tshuva, who was thirsty, the animal soul was involved in its own material activities. Now it's become aware of the superior divine, so it cries out, and that adds the fuel, and that fuel becomes the fire. And this vahu, And this leads to hisapchus p'chinas ha'esh sheba. And this is the transformation of the fire in it. Instead of its fiery passion being directed to Elam Hazah, to materialism, it's now being directed toward the Eish of Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam. The Neir Hashem, toward godliness. V'rishpei Eish Ava Aza, and transformed to the flaming fire of this powerful love of God. V'zehu Neir Shel HaNeshama. And this is the meaning of what we say in the pasuk. What is the pasuk coming to emphasize? Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam. Remember, he asked at the beginning of the Maimer, what is this inyan? What's the pasuk coming to tell us? Now we understand what it's coming to tell us. It's not just telling us that the soul is like a flame and a candle. It's telling us the whole story, a narrative of life. How also the animal soul becomes part of the flame, becomes the oil, the fuel, part of the flame. And how does this happen? Shehi mahizbananus nefesh alikis atzma. This comes from the contemplation of the nefesh alikis on its own. Meaning, this is all generated from the nefesh alikis. This is very important to what we're going to learn later. Because this is not through a mitzvah, it's not through Torah, it's not through any other things. It's the nefesh alikis itself contemplating Ashma and Baruch Shem, in turn generating this fire, this love, and in turn even affecting, spilling over to the love of coming also from the animal soul, fueling and feeding the shemen, feeding the wick in this experience of Elikus, of the divine. Now, if you really look at chapter 9 in Tanya, he doesn't use the word ner there, but he essentially says that when a person contemplates, the love of the right side of the heart, of the animals, of the divine soul, spills over into the left side of the heart to the point that it fills it up with that type of love. And now also the animal soul gets consumed with this very love. Now, that's ends this paragraph in Torah Ohr. Let me just say one thing and then I'll stop for questions. Obviously, you could ask, has this ever happened to you? We all say Shema many times a day, Baruch Shem, and our Nefesh Abam is not necessarily getting so excited. Even Nefesh Alikis may not get so excited. So remember, the Alter Rebbe and the Maimarim are talking about what should be, not what is. This is the way Shema is supposed to be said. So we now have an objective, a goal. So if a person doesn't do it because we've either not been trained or because we're rushing, most of us are davening very quickly. I'm not saying to be critical. I just want to make it clear that this is not just some pie in the sky theory. This is the way Shema is supposed to be said. Baruch Shem. This is the real meaning of a tefillah and leading to Vahafta. Each person on their level. Remember, all these questions can be applied also to Tanya, because the Tanya is expecting that a person is going to work on it. When you work on it during davening, and the Shema and the Baruch Shem and so on, you'll have some impact. Again, each one on his level. For some of us, it may just scratch the surface of the animal soul. For some, it could be deeper. It all depends on the person, the Aveda, how much work you do, and also where you stand. As time passes, and the more you work on it, the more effect it will have on you. Mashpim in Yeshiva would teach us that you begin by doing it slowly, like anything. You can't run a 21-mile marathon overnight. Begin by doing a few minutes, contemplating a little when you say Shema. Don't just say the words, think about it. Find something that can affect you, that you feel God's unity, that in turn should affect also your animal soul's distractions, at least temporarily. So just begin always small on the steps that baby steps, and then you grow from there. Just pointing out, the Alter Rebbe is laying out the picture of what needs to be done and what the goal is and what the ultimate standard and objective is. Just wanted to qualify that. So what we do have here is the first time, because Ayin Beis never got back to the topic to answer the question how the Nefesh Abamis is transformed. The Alter Rebbe did get back to it by telling us that this Isbonnus has an effect on weakening and ultimately taming and transforming the animal soul. Now, there's plenty that needs to be unpacked here. That's why the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer takes this. What do we learn here? Maybe 10 lines, last 10 lines, and he goes pages, maybe 20, 30 pages, if I recall. 20 pages for sure. The Rebbe Rashab, equally 11 pages. Just on one thing, not the effect on Nefesh Habamis, just on what is the Isbonenus. Because the more you understand what the Isbonenus consists of, the more effect it's going to have on the animal soul. Now you can say, why didn't the Alter Rebbe spell it all out? Because the Alter Rebbe is Chochmah. The Alter Rebbe laid out the basic points. The Mittler Rebbe develops it, and the Rebbe Rashab develops it further. So we will go back, once we learn the Mittler Rebbe, we will go back to Ayin Beis, and you'll see how Ayin Beis takes these paragraphs, these ideas rather, develops it. But the problem is in Ayin Beis, he doesn't go back to Nefesh Habamis. And here he does. So we see now the direction of what these themes are leading to. That the more you understand the unity of the divine, Yichud Tata, Yichud Ilah, the Yichud of both of them, which right here you read, you don't see it explicitly, but if you think about it, he said it. Remember, he said Avaya Elokeinu, he said Avaya Echad. Remember in Mittler Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab said that's Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata in Shema itself. He also mentioned Baruch Shem, but he didn't call it Yichud Ilah, Yichud Tata, but he definitely mentioned it. That Mittler Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab spelled that out as Yichud Tata and Yichud Ilah, Yichud Tata, with more details. Also with Birchis Yetzer that precedes Shema, which is the Malachim. So Alter Rebbe also did not mention, but all that is in those Maimorim. And all that combined together, what the Alter Rebbe is saying, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimon, Ayin Beis will come away with a picture of how the animal soul is actually transformed by this Shema and Baruch Shem process into V'ahavta Shamalkecha b'chol avavcha. But by no means are we finished with it. I'm learning it inside with the Alter Rebbe, and we're actually seeing with our own eyes how an Inyan Chassidus develops. The Alter Rebbe laid out the initial points, the Mittler Rebbe will develop it, and Rebbe Rashab will develop it further. So just keep all that in mind as we go further. So by no means am I saying everything is finished. We have a lot more to go here, but I'll stop here for any questions.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a comment. When we're studying these things, I know this is seemingly an unfinished answer, unfinished question that was not answered, and obviously we're delving into it. But also in Ayin Beis, we're discussing the concept of the bitter waters, and everything that we're hearing, it basically parallels that concept. That initially it was just like sweetening a coffee. It was so much sugar, it was overwhelming. Then the next stage was that it was like an attorney in a courtroom, that it's defeated, but it's not convinced. And then the third level was the transformation that basically the other side was rising above and reaching even a higher level. So to me, that's pretty much like the same concept we're discussing here, right?
Your mind works much faster than mine. I'm not even close to processing it on that level. Right now, as always, I try to concentrate what he's saying here. Once we finish it, it'd be easier for me to answer your question. So it's very possible, but I'm not even going there because it's too much processing for me. I'm trying to. The more I understand this, the better we'll be able to understand the bigger picture. So I'm not saying what you're saying is incorrect. I'm too early in the journey for me to venture there yet. So if you don't mind, when we finish the topic, please remind me again if I don't remember on my own, which I probably will, because I do know that we have to connect it to all those levels. And we talked about three levels in Kesser, 3 levels in Sapcha, and so on. But we will get there. Remember another thing, that what you just quoted is all in the Momata Lamaila of Tefillah. And here, he's been talking here in context of Torah. So we have to also understand, is it Momata Lamaila, Momaila Lamata, from the bottom up or the top down? But as I said, be premature to go there. We need to first figure out what he says, and then we'll tie it together. So we'll get there.
Thank you.
Okay? Yeah. Are there any other questions about what we learned now? Okay, so essentially, what I would have done now, what could have been done now, I should say, is we can go to the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer and see how he elaborates on what we just learned. Because the Alter Rebbe is moving now on. He's going to move to Ner Mitzvah. What's Ner Mitzvah? And what does that add? And then there's an explanation of this Maimer in the coming pages. So my preference is to learn it the way the Alter Rebbe taught it, then go to the Mittler Rebbe. But really, logically, if you're going to go more, I guess, encyclopedic, you probably would go now to the Mittler Rebbe to understand what is it, how to fully understand this answer with a Nefesh Habamis. So I'm choosing just to continue reading because it's a lot more practical to do it that way. Because if we go now to the Mittler Rebbe, and it'll probably be a few weeks of learning that alone because it's a lot of pages, and then we go back here, I don't know, find that to be a little difficult to do, even though it could be done. I'm just telling you my inner workings here, thinking out loud here, the process that how I would like to teach it. But I do understand that going out to the Mittler Rebbe right here would help a lot in understanding what we just learned. But I think it's also more respectful to the Alter Rebbe and to the Rabbeim to go in the order that they taught it. Remember, at the end of the day, if we lived then by the Alter Rebbe, we didn't have the luxury yet of a Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. We'd have to learn this. Then the Mittler Rebbe, around 20 years later, I think this is Samach Zayin, I think that's Pei Zayin. Yeah, around 20 years later, the Mittler Rebbe said his Maimer and wrote it. That comes to explain this one. So if we really want to go in chronological order, that's the way to learn it. But as I said, intellectually, I do have a temptation to go to the Mittler Rebbe and understand that. But I think I'm going to continue learning here. Unless somebody has an argument against that, that's probably what I would do.
Let me, if I can ask, I mean, I hear the teacher, so I'm just curious. I haven't read most of the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, but I'm guessing you have. In that regard, is there a clear break in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer as between Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam and Ner Mitzvah, the Torah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Torah.
The Mittler Rebbe's Maimer follows the same structure, except it's 20 pages instead of 10 lines. Yeah, the same structure. The Mittler Rebbe's Maimer is structured like the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, but the Alter Rebbe's Maimer is 4 pages, and Mittler Rebbe 5 pages. The Mittler Rebbe's Maimer is 70 pages. So the structure is the same. It just expanded. Each section is expanded. So the Mittler Rebbe will first deal with Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, just like the Alter Rebbe did, but with a lot more elaboration. Like you see the Rebbe Rashab did. He took 11 pages just to explain Yichud. He didn't even get to the Nefesh Habam. And then comes after the Nefesh Habam, and then he says, and now let's understand Ner Mitzvah. Exactly as so what we're doing, so that's why I would learn this, because this is more of like the concentrated Chachma of the Alter Rebbe. Mittler Rebbe is the Bina of all this, and in this order. It won't be confusing. That's why I'm preferring that direction, because the Mittler Rebbe is going to go with the same structure, however, with much more elaboration. I'm just saying, on an intellectual level, there's a certain temptation to say, let's understand what we, like probably if I wrote a book about this or an article, I wouldn't do it that way. I would probably first explain the Nefesh Habamis, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam with the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. Then I would go, let's now understand Ner Mitzvah, and then Torah Ohr, because that would be a lot more easier for us, for a reader to learn. But in the order of learning my Morim, it's probably better to learn it this way. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, the end result that we have now, the luxury of the Mittler Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab, obviously, you want to see how they explain what the Alter Rebbe just said. It's like learning the Rashi and the Alter Rebbe. They are like the Rashi before moving to the next piece of Gemara, so to speak, the next part of this narrative. I just feel it's more respectful and more, I guess, more the right way to do in learning process is to do it. I'm just, again, voicing my 2 options. They're both, none of them are wrong. Nothing is right and wrong. You could learn it both ways. I'm just thinking that's probably the better way to go, but I do have my my doubts,
Yeah, no, I hear you. Intellectually, I would vote for moving to the middle Rebbe, but you're the teacher.
Yeah, we'll be patient. I mean, it's because there's another thing that I didn't mention. The Alter Rebbe, whatever the Mittler Rebbe writes, is hinted to in the Alter Rebbe. It's not like going off the reservation, obviously, God forbid. So I feel there are a lot of things the Alter Rebbe says in the next pages, even though he's moving to Ner Mitzvah, that help us understand Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam too. It's not like he's moving to, okay, let's talk about another topic altogether. It's all going to come together. So I feel if we go now to the Mittler Rebbe, we're going to lose some of that. Even though we may come back here, but it'll be a lot more complicated because then we have to go back and see. So I would, let's stick to the way I plan to do it. I think it's the wiser way to do. And remember, once I qualified it, we'll do that anyway. Once we finish and go to the Mittler Rebbe, I'll definitely go back to the Torah Ohr and say, here's what it says in Torah Ohr, and here's what the Mittler Rebbe elaborates. So we're not losing out here. It's not like it's just a matter of order. Do you begin like is the second class in this semester follow this way, or it will be the 10th class? So it'll be there. So yeah, we're just part of making history here and developing it. In other words, once this is recorded and it's all the classes have been done, you can always jump there, frankly. So
that's well said.
Yeah.
Also, we keep going back to the Ayin base also.
Right, exactly.
So that's why I think it makes sense to do it this way too.
I'm sharing this very intentionally because I also, very often I say about teaching methodology. I'm sharing my methodology here because I think it may help you in your own learning and also how you teach others. There's different methods. Again, if someone taught it the other way, I wouldn't say they did something terribly wrong. The more I think about it, the more I think that it'll be more beneficial to all of us, this direction. Yeah. Look,
I think it's good.
I'm patient. It's not like we have a deadline that we have to fit in the next hour and you have to choose what are you going to do now. We have, thank God, God bless us with health and all the good things in life, blessings. We'll be able to cover it all.
Yeah, I think the return, anyways, later, the chizur on an expansion by the Mittler Rebbe, it reinforces it. So I think there's even an intellectual argument for doing it the way you've chosen.
Okay, good. Anyway, I like to be open and transparent, and not there's any secrets here, but just yeah. So now,
Weiter.
and keep in mind. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
No. I just said weiter, further.
Oh, yeah. Keep in mind the triangle here as well. I mentioned it yesterday. I want to say it again. That at the end of the day, what the picture is going to come the full picture is going to include a comprehensive map of the neshama's role, like we just learned. What mitzvah adds as a flame, as a candle as well. Mitzvah is also a candle. What does it add to the neshama as a candle? What Torah Ohr adds? Tefillah we'll talk about as well, as you'll see. It's going to come into the picture. Mamata l'mayla, mamayla lamata, which we also learn both in Ayin Beis and in Torah Shalom. So you're going to see what ultimately develops once you learn it all, which again took me some time once I started reading it. That's why I'm doing it this way, because I realized that you'll appreciate Ayin Beis completely differently. The brilliance of the Rebbe Rashab, of understanding the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, is mind-blowing. Because I was even thinking, if we didn't have Ayin Beis, how would people learn the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer? So you could definitely understand it. The themes are clear. But the Ayin Beis takes it to a completely different dimension. And you'll also understand the 1,477 pages. Because the Rebbe Rashab, what he's doing here is weaving together Maimarim that not necessarily we would all necessarily connect. I mean, of course, there are connections. But he's weaving it together that you suddenly see these Maimarim as like central cornerstone in Chassidus, Chabad in general. That's what you'll see is going to come out of all of this. And then when you go back to the Alter Rebbe, you find, wow, it's like once you learn Gemara, you suddenly realize the Mishnah, which is only a few lines, has all that in it, or even more than that. A verse in Chumash, one verse, and you learn all the Torah Shabbat Peh, or all the interpretation. You say, wow, that verse had all that in it. It's like atomic energy in just one line. So it's quite an experience, as we shall see. I think that alone can tame the Nefesh Habamis. Just seeing that. Not even mentioning divine unity.
I like that. Atomic Torah.
Yeah. Nuclear Torah, atomic Torah, right? And in times of war, you want to unleash all the spiritual weapons we have, right?
Totally.
I don't mean to
100%.
allude to using those physical weapons. I just meant it in the spiritual sense.
No. Yeah, totally.
Oh, I'm convinced. I think I mentioned to you. You have to remember, Ayin Beis was written in one of the most difficult times in history. This is right middle of World War I, Russian Revolution. That what would unleash afterwards the nightmare of World War II. So I have no doubt that the Rabbeim, the Rebbes, were writing like going inside the engine room of existence and trying to do whatever they can to just tamper with that wiring so the world would not just completely explode, and be able to get through this and be here today to talk about it. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Because to me, that's what Torah is. It's like the blueprint. If you want to change the world, you have to look into the Torah. Staka bar Raisa bar Alma. So it's like you want to change the structure of the building, you got to go back to the blueprint and figure out what's what, and do the proper tinkering, so then it can affect the larger world. So maybe it's very good timing with what's going on in Eretz Yisrael.
Amazing.
Yeah. I've written this every time I did analysis of my Morim. There's the Hemshech of the Tzadik Dalet from the Rebbe, from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Tafresh Tzadik Dalet is 1934. Can you imagine? Right when the Nazis are starting their coming to power. And those Morim there are so deep. And we learned them actually inside. We learned that whole Hemshech back at the end of volume 2. Remember Yesh, Ayin, Yesh, and all those levels. We went through all those pages, if you recall. All the levels of Ayin. It's all about bitla illness. So when I remember learning it in depth, I realized the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying it and writing it in those times. You start thinking, it's like, so the world is literally about to go into flames in the worst possible way. And here the Frierdiker Rebbe is writing these deep concepts. You could almost think it's like a dissonance going on. But then when you realize that was the opposite, he's really doing what he could do as a Rebbe into, as I said, in the engine room, get into it's like getting into the kishkis of what God wants in this whole thing. Yeah. In other words, it's not about just cowering in fear and just dealing with the facts on the ground. It's trying to get into the inner soul of all of existence. I wish it could have prevented the Holocaust. Well, that's another story. But it definitely empowered us. Yeah. So I'm going to stop here. I'll just give a little introduction to what we're going to learn next. So you'll see the next paragraph begins, V'inyan ner shel ha-mitzvah. Now that we covered ner shel ha-neshama, ner Hashem nishma sadam, so what's the ner of the mitzvah? So you see also the depth, 2 different verses, but both use ner as the operative example, a flame, a candle. So what's the candle of a mitzvah do here? As I said, the isbannus of the neshama b'shma, even though you could argue Shema is a mitzvah, that isbannus itself is the mitzvah, and v'hafta is a mitzvah, but he's still going to explain now what what is the fire the candle that a mitzvah adds, and of course why it's called ner mitzvah, and then Torah is going to be called Ohr, which is of course a higher level than ner. So that's the next section. And then if you look That's going to be, then he's going to go to Er Torah, and he's going to finish this mimer. It's not a long mimer, but it's very concentrated, as I mentioned, very compact. Then there's a beer on this mimer, which is not also a few pages, and then we go to the Mittler Rebbe, and all along we will interweave it with Ayin Beis. But I think we should just stop here because to start now, just a few lines. Let's begin that tomorrow. Okay, any other questions, comments, thoughts?
The atomic power in one verse. It answers a question that I have.
What's
It
the
tells us
question?
during the time of war or time of any other issue we have, we should say Tehillim. What could we do from here? Just say Tehillim. Why? What's in Tehillim that's going to help the war? So if we would know what kind of power every postic has, there's so much in it, we would, like I think it was Tzemach Tzedek said, if people would know the power of Tehillim, they would sit and say Tehillim the whole day. We don't understand. A Rebbe understands it. It's like a soldier at war. They tell him, use the atomic power. He doesn't know how it works, but he relies on the one who, on his sergeant, on the one who created this machine, because they understand what it is, and he just does it. So we are told the power of saying Tehillim, playing Tehillim, what it could do in this world. If we trust our Rabbeim, our Tzaddikim, we could do it and understand a little bit what's behind it.
Exactly right. You quoted Tzemach Tzedek, right? If we knew the power, we would. Yeah, totally right. I mean, it's based on the principle, as I said, that God first looked into the Torah and then created the world. So obviously, therefore, every letter in Torah is like he said here. The creation of existence comes from Dvar Hashem. So what better way to affect existence than accessing Dvar Hashem, the Word of God, which is Tehillim is exactly that. Yeah. Yeah.
This is a little bit off the topic, but it's not, Rabbi. Can you, given that and given the power within the words and the Lashon HaKodesh, should we really be saying it in Hebrew? I mean, does it have the same effect, do you think?
I've spoken about this many times. I've asked this question, and my life to this applied. I've spoken about it in a few classes. Hebrew is like, the difference would be playing the musical notes as they were written by the composer, or playing it by ear that relates to you more. So the power of the Hebrew, the original Hebrew, as the way David HaMelech, King David said it, he said, Yir l'rotzen imre fi. He asked God, please invest my words with the power that whenever the Jews will need help, they can use the words I used when I cried out to you. And God gave it that power. So there's something about the very words, just like there is about, like I said, musical, certain key words that were used by the original. But at the same time, being that not everybody knows Hebrew, so the most important thing is to speak from your heart. And if the words come out in English, so be it. So I would say both. I always tell people, say one of the prayers in Hebrew, like Shema or something like that, Modani, and the rest say it in English, or say whatever language that your heart relates to most. It's a combination of both. And you don't want to spend so much time breaking your teeth with the Hebrew and not being able to get the job done, which is to speak from your heart. When you speak to your father or your mother and you need something, it doesn't matter what language you use. Your father will understand you. But the Hebrew still has, I don't say shortcuts, but a certain potency. It's like anything, like, if you want to read a book, a Havdil, and you don't speak Russian, so you're not going to read War and Peace in Tolstoy's original. So a good translator will capture it, but it's still never going to be like the original. So you really want to have a combination ultimately. and you grow in that journey.
Thank you.
You know. Okay, so we stop here. End of the paragraph on page on Torah Ohr 38C. What we see on top of page is 76. And we shall